It's time now for perspective. French women never get fat and their children are perfectly behaved. They're also extremely well read and always look chic without looking like it's taken them too much effort. That, at least, is the almost omnipresent image of French women we encounter in much of the media. But just how true is it? And what about those French women who don't fit so neatly into those tropes? Well, my guest today is Franco-British fashion journalist Alice Pfeiffer, who's just written a book called Je ne suis pas Parisienne, I am not a Parisian. Thank you so much for coming on to speak to us on France 24. Now, I mentioned a few ideas there. Are there any other key components of French femininity that make up this idealised vision?
Well, the idea is that she's generally effortless, which is a complete myth and a fraud, by the way. But so it's the idea of a woman who wakes up perfect in the morning, who doesn't brush her hair, who runs around in 12-centimetre heels with the dog and probably climbs up the Eiffel Tower looking for her lover. This is what perfume ads tell us, at least. It's a woman who never puts on weight, who doesn't get old, who's as you said, whose children behave, who never seems to have any money problems either. So it's generally a white middle-upper-class woman living in Saint-Germain-des-Prés who's living a bohemian lifestyle with cash.
And it's a complete myth, a fabrication, in your opinion?
It's a complete marketing fabrication. I mean, I'm technically Parisian. I was born just outside Paris, schooled in Paris up to the age of 15. I still haven't met anyone who looks like that. And I know I worked for a lot of British press, and they'd meet me and be slightly disappointed because they expected something different, maybe. But the whole point of my book is that if I don't feel Parisian, I don't know who does, because I'm technically Parisian, which is why je suis pas parisienne, because no one is.
And where do these ideals come from then, do you think?
It's a mix of things. I think the first wave was the garçon in the 20s, sort of the French take on flapper girls. And then the 60s, which really sort of put together the idea of a femme enfant, sort of a childish woman, as we say, and which was all picked up and composed into a very marketable figure in the early 2000s when luxury groups came together. And they had to sell Paris as a postcard and a luxury destination in which you have the Macaron and you have the Tour Eiffel and you have the Parisienne, who shows to you how to live and how to be savoir-vivre and savoir-faire.
Now, you have a lot to say in your book about the different types of femininity that seem to be socially acceptable here in France and also over in the UK. What do you think are the key differences?
I think there's several things. There's first, the French are laïque, so secular, and they're universalist. So they think that one woman can speak for all women. That's the general gist of it. Whereas England is multicultural, so you don't have one London, you have many, many different kinds of Londoners who are all proud of their origins. In France, all of that is erased. Also in France, there's no time to be a teenager, whereas in England, you're expected to, dye your hair green and start a band and rebel against your parents. Whereas in France, if you belong to a certain class, you have to look part of the class, and that's the main thing. So I think there's an amount of freedom that you get in England. Also, England not being a Latin country, you don't have men facing you or addressing you as directly as they would in France. So it's definitely, there's a lack of freedom and a sense of self-surveillance that you have in France that's constant.
I get the sense in your book that you believe, as you've just said, that women can get away with more in the UK. There was, of course, this ladette culture in the 1990s, yes. Women enjoying sport, drinking pints, acting in a typically male way.
Yes.
That never really happened in France.
Never. I was told off for ordering entire pints of beer, I remember when I first came back. And no, I was told by a gallerist that the second you feel drunk is when you should stop drinking. The Brits are exactly the opposite. The second you feel drunk is when you should order more drinks, So there's definitely a pressure put on women to behave and act their part and not to take too much space, physically and symbolically too, Not take up too much space next to the man who's perfectly macho.
And where's this pressure coming from? Is it just from men, or is it also women exerting this pressure on other women?
I think it's women watching each other, women watching themselves silently. Also, the idea that you can't share the fact that you're on a diet or that you're trying to lose weight because it's all supposed to be natural. So it's everyone's little secret. And women telling each other off constantly. I've had editors telling me off for ordering dessert back in the days. So, and it's men, and it's also visual culture. It's advertising, especially luxury advertising, that always systematically shows one side of Paris and never another. We're only happy to look at Paris if it looks like Amélie Poulain again. Whereas in England, that'd be completely different. You have, just look at the way Eurostar ads are used. On one side, if you go to London, then you see the ad is a man in a suit with high heels. The French ad is a woman who's tall and thin and holding her dog, and she has a little carrière messe. And that's Paris. Paris is history and London is innovation.
And would you, by extension, say that this idea of the female French ideal is pretty old-fashioned? It's not inclusive. It doesn't.
Definitely.
It doesn't take into consideration the fact that women come in all different shapes and sizes, colours, ethnicities, sexual orientations.
Definitely, definitely. Because if you read between the lines, the Parisian is someone who was born into bourgeoisie, because the cliché Chanel vintage bag. So it's a woman who was born with money, who is straight, who is heterosexual, because there's a whole trend of wearing boy clothing called boyfriend shirts. So it's a woman who's also straight, and it's a woman who's also white, because if you walk into Sephora or makeup stores, any makeup that's over a certain shade is called peau ethnique. So there's still a lot to do to stop pretending that France isn't a diverse country, which it is.
And how do you go about that? Whose job is it to change things, in your opinion?
Well, I think first luxury groups and brands have to start stocking sizes that go over a size 40. Also, I think as long as there's a market for it, there's a problem. So maybe internet can help and bring together women who rebel against this together, which it's been doing. You have more and more feminist groups, feminist newsletters today rebelling against this. Alternative magazines, fanzines. So I think it's up to the women to take control of their representation.
Alice Pfeiffer, author of Je ne suis pas parisienne, I am not a Parisian. Thank you very much indeed for coming on to speak to us on France 24.